Morning. Sorry, got to chew up my cough drop here. All right. So far in the first two lessons, we've looked at the story of David and how that relates to a lot of our stories. Last week we then looked at the cycle of addiction and all of the chemicals that our bodies produce and what makes breaking free from addiction that much harder. And today we're going to talk about the effects. Last week I said this several times that, of course, obviously we have a problem with this, but for a lot of people, their defense of why they don't want to talk about this or address these issues that we're seeing, whether it's in the church or in just society, is because, well, it's not really hurting anyone. It's not really having that big of an effect. So, what people do in their own houses and their own time, what business is that of mine? But the reality is that we are living at rock bottom. Troy, does this work? Was that me? That was me. Okay. We got a new clicker here, which I'm going to show it off here a little bit. I can point at things on these screens. How it works, I have no clue. How does that work at all? Anyways, now I can point at things. Andy hooked me up now that we went to these TVs. Anyways, we're living at rock bottom. This is just the standard now. What is rock bottom? It's the lowest point possible. It's the point where you get to where you start asking questions like, how did I get here? Or I had it all and I threw it away. The cycle of addiction only goes downwards. It's like circling the drain, right? And it pulls you further and further down into despair, and it would be easy for us just to sit here, and as depressing as it is, we live in a rock bottom world. And we cannot escape the effects of sin. They are all around us, and if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes it's us that goes looking for it. In Judges chapter 14, we see the account of Samson. Judges 14:1, it says, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. What is Timnah? Well, Timnah is 4 miles into enemy territory. The children of God, the Israelites, were told, do not intermarry with the people of the land, with non-believers. And so Samson is purposefully going and looking for trouble. And we know what this is like. This is the scrolling on social media with having no purpose other than maybe I'll see something that catches my eye. Maybe I'll see something attractive on here. Maybe I'll see something that I can lust at. Or channel surfing late at night. You never know what you might come across, and maybe that's what you are looking for. Or frequenting places that we're not supposed to be. He saw something, or Samson saw something here, and he forgot everything about God. Sound familiar? Samson's foray into sin ends with fox's tails caught on fire, and this woman, whom he claimed he loved, dead, and an all-out war. That's what chapters 14 and 15 are all about. But at the end of chapter 15, we see this hopeful verse In chapter 15, verse 20, it says, Samson judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. At the end of it all, seemingly, Samson learned his lesson for a time and continued his reign as judge without incident. He was doing what God wanted him to do until we get to the very next verse in chapter 16, verse 1. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute and went into her. Gaza is 25 miles into enemy territory, 25 miles from Zorah. That's where Samson was from. 25 miles to roll the dice on 20 years of faithfulness. How many steps is 25 miles? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. It's 56,250 steps. And I can only imagine on his journey, 25 miles away from what he was supposed to be doing, him asking himself the question of, am I really going to do this? This is crazy. What am I doing here? You see, no one ever plans on ruining their life, right? Like, no one wakes up and says, you know what sounds good today? I'm going to ruin everything. It happens one step at a time. In Samson's life, this is what his life was. It was marked by foolishness and pride. Pride says, I can take it, I got this, and it leads to destruction. For a moment, I want us to consider the mind of the enemy, right? What is Satan thinking about, and how does this fit into our struggle with pornography? Consider the possibility that evil has been plotting against your sexuality your entire life. Satan wants to destroy the glory of God, but he can't, right? Satan can't do that. He doesn't have the power. He's a created being, just like we are. And so Satan can't destroy the glory of God, and so he then goes after the one thing that God cares about most, us, right? It's like a terrorist trying to go after the president, where the president might be, guarded, much to a higher degree than his children, and so an easier target if a terrorist was wanting to try to cause harm to the president might be to go after his children. Satan seeks to steal, kill, and destroy, and so simple ridicule of us simply isn't enough. Instead, if you were Satan, if you were evil, you would plot after the most valuable, the most beautiful and powerful dimension of who we are, our sexuality. This is the mind of evil. And you think about Satan's return on investment for just one picture or one video, one experience of abuse. What's the return on investment for him? A lifetime of shame, right? And so is porn a victimless crime? Let's go through this one at a time. We've talked about the drugs being produced by our bodies: testosterone, norepinephrine, oxytocin, serotonin, but it always comes back to dopamine. Dopamine is the main player here, and we've talked about this a little bit, but we need to consider this on a higher plane here. Dopamine loves novelty. What does that mean? It means enough is never enough. That means as great and, outstanding as pizza is, you can't eat pizza every day. I don't care how much, Davey, you can't do it, okay? Davey's back there thinking Domino's has this new Parmesan cheese stuffed crust pizza. We got it last night. Man, that is, this presentation brought to you by Domino's. And I love pizza. Obviously, look at me, right? I love pizza. I'm a pizza guy. I still can't eat it every day. Why? Why is that? Because dopamine loves novelty. It wants something new, right? Even as things, it's like foods, right? It's like we've had most of the foods that we've eaten a lot of times, but we can't get bogged down on just one thing. And the same thing is true when it comes to pornography. That it's never just one image. It's never just one video. It's a plethora, right? It's like, I might have liked this video now, but if all I watched was that one video, it might get old after a while. And so dopamine wants something new. It craves novelty. It's never satisfied. And the progression of dopamine in the sexual sense is that it always moves towards the explicit and the taboo, the more dangerous type things. Dopamine has been connected as a significant factor in instances of sexual assault, violent crime, rape, sexual abuse, and even murder. Ted Bundy said this: "I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence. Without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, deeply consumed by the addiction." Ted Bundy himself was exposed to softcore porn magazines at the age of 12, and as his progression progressed, he admitted in his interview that it helped mold and shape his violent behaviors, always progressing towards the more violent, the more taboo subjects, and until eventually just watching it wasn't enough for him. He had to act. We have a history of serial killers in our country that all of them have a history with pornography. Now, not everyone who watches porn becomes a murderer. Okay, that's important, right? Like and actually thinking that way towards porn addicts is harmful, right? We can't be thinking that. But this shows the end of the line. This is the end game, right? Of where this can lead if you get yourself on the dopamine treadmill and keep on progressing. Things only get worse because dopamine loves novelty. Besides this, wives of porn addicts have shown signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And you wives in here today who have experienced something like this, you know just how damaging it can be. And of course, women, on the whole, relationships might be the most important thing to them. And when the primary relationship in their life is now unsafe and unsecure, women feel betrayed in the most intimate relationship that they can have, and their whole lives can come apart. We're going to talk more about this in our next lesson. But also there's sex trafficking. Trafficking is increasing because demand is increasing. This is a dark side of the world that we typically don't like to think of, mainly because we don't see it, right? Like, unless you are actively engaged in this, it's the black market. It's stuff that's really kind of outside of our purview, but it is happening. There are several organizations in our country now whose sole purpose is rescuing young women who have been kidnapped and enslaved through drugs or violence to perform sexual acts and film them and then make money off of them. We don't like to think that that is true, but it is. Like that is happening in our country today. One researcher said this. He says there are only two conclusions here: that men are naturally willing to do this to women, that it's biology, or that they're being socialized to the culture to lose all empathy for women. I refuse to accept that men are born rapists, porn users, or Johns, and as an academic, as a sociologist and a mother, I believe it is the way men are shaped by society. The biggest educator for young men today is pornography. Sex educator, that is, which is increasingly violent and dehumanizing, and it changes the way that men view women. We're seeing this kind of come to a head on on our college campuses today. Sexual assault and rape are on the rise on our college campuses. The statistics tell us that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men will be sexually assaulted while they are in college. That means that in the upcoming school year, more than 100,000 college students will be sexually assaulted. If you want to learn more about this, there's a great documentary on Netflix. It's called The Hunting Grounds. That's where I got this statistic, The Hunting Ground. It's a tough watch, but it is educational, especially for you parents that have kids that are in college or that someday will be in college. It is happening, and it's on the rise. In 2009, there are 3,264 reported cases on college campuses in our country. In 2013, it rose to 6,016 reported cases, and then, who knows what 12 years later looks like today. One researcher said, while research is not able to show causality, something that no social science research can do, pornography is strongly correlated with factors widely recognized as contributors to sexual violence, including defining masculinity as embodied through violence, hostile attitudes towards women, and gender inequality. Furthermore, the average age of first exposure to pornography is around 12 years of age, and the pornography that is cheapest and easiest to access contains very high rates of violence against women and promotes a degrading and dehumanizing form of sexuality for boys. Boys and men are the majority of consumers of such pornography, making it the dominant sexual framework to which boys are socialized and to which girls, as sexual partners, must respond. What is being discussed here is what the researchers call an arousal template. Basically, what that is why, and this is not just for men, it's for all of us, why are we attracted to the things that we're attracted to, right? Like, whether it's body type, skin color, hair color, ethnicity, like, why do we like the things that we like? And a lot of this just goes back to, it can come back to our first sexual experience as people, whether that is an actual experience or just seeing something in front of our eyes. Sometimes that can get seared into our brains. It's much like how we all learned our first language, right? Like, we didn't decide which language we're going to learn. We're just around the things, and so that's how we picked up on it. Our arousal template is much the same thing. That's how it works. We like what we are exposed to. And so way back when, if you saw a still picture, whether it was in a magazine or online, it was just a still picture of a naked person or them performing a sexual act, that could be seared into that person's memory. And they say that nerves that fire together wire together. All right? And so there's a certain amount of neurotransmitters in our brain that when we see that, all of these things, it's dangerous, it's exciting, it's all of these emotions that we've talked about. All of those are firing off in our brain, nerves that fire together, wire together, and so that could create a pathway in our brain of, this is what I'm into, this is what I like. But if you are first exposed to maybe instead of a still picture, a video with full audio to it, there are more transmitters firing off in our brains. Nerves that fire together, wire together, right? And then you take that one step further, that it's not just a video with full audio of maybe a couple who seemingly are in love with each other and it's a relationship. But what if your first exposure to sexuality is something that is extremely violent and dehumanizing? And what if that gets wired together in your brain that this is what sexuality is? You can see how young people today, and again, that is the type of pornography that is easiest for young people to access is very violent and dehumanizing types of pornography. That young people today, when we think about us older generations, when we think about our first exposure with pornography, they're starting much, much further down the road than what we did. And again, you cannot prove that the two are linked, that just because the rise in sexuality and pornography, and we see this rise of sexual assault on our campuses today, can't prove that they are linked, but we see an increase in technology and a decrease in patience. Enough is never enough because dopamine craves novelty. The largest consumers of pornography today are teenagers, and so we have young people who get just a hint of a little freedom in their life, and they are sex charged with an unrealistic view of sex, and it's no wonder why we are seeing this on our college campuses today. We are living at rock bottom, and people are treating each other like garbage. But the cost of porn addiction is not just on other people. It also hurts the man themselves. Erectile dysfunction is the highest rates that it's ever seen. Consider this, that there are more men between ages 18 and 40 that are currently using ED medication than those who are 40 to 80. You would think that would be opposite, right? That should be switched, but it's not. There are more young people using it than old people. Before 2002, men under 40 that used ED medication was 2%. In 2011, it had risen to 28% of men under 40 using ED medication. That's a 13,000% increase. A researcher said, having spent so much time with unnatural experiences with paper, cell phones, and cyberspace, they seem to find it difficult to have sex with a real human being. Porn has raised their expectation and demand for types and amounts of sexual experiences, and at the same time reducing their ability to have sex. Another researcher said masturbation during porn use may interfere with normal intercourse, with consequences on interest in normal, all entered expectations, altered stimulation patterns with excessive masturbation, leading to ejaculatory dysfunction and diminished erections during intimacy with a partner. Porn is hurting. Is hurting the people who actually are using it. Porn use also has been found to substantially hinder college students' academic performances. They find that they can't focus, they have decreased desire to do productive things, and an increase in risk-taking and impulsive behavior. It's hurting everyone. That's the simple way of saying it. In ancient times, I might have told this story before of the Eskimo wolf trap. But the way that the Inuits or the Eskimos would hunt a wolf in ancient times is they would find an area where they knew there were wolves present. They were, hunting the caribou or their own herds, or even attacking them. And so they would take a cup of blood, of elk or caribou blood, and then they would take one of their knives and dip it into this cup of blood, and then they would leave it out in the cold to freeze overnight. And then they would take that knife out of the cup, and so now you have a blood popsicle, right? And they would take that blood popsicle and they would take it out to where they knew wolves were, and they would bury that knife in the ground, bury the hilt of it. So the only thing that was out of the ground was the knife edge, right, with this blood popsicle on it. The wolves obviously would smell the blood, and they would come rushing to it, and they would start licking that blood popsicle. Their tongues would be numb by the cold, so that when their tongue first hit the edge of that knife, they couldn't feel it. And their tongue would get cut again and again and again. And before long, the blood that they were tasting and the blood that they were filling their bellies with was not from that blood popsicle, it was their own blood. The Eskimos would come back in the morning and they would find the wolf dead, its tongue cut to ribbons, and its belly full of its own blood. Porn desensitizes you to reality. This is what pornography does to people. That in our excitement or in the rush of doing something dangerous, we don't realize how much damage we're doing to ourselves. They did this study a while ago. This was back in the 70s when measuring brain waves and brain activity was just a new science. It was a fledgling science. And so they were like, let's test out all these things. And so they hooked up a bunch of people with a bunch of electrodes on their heads, and they started measuring brainwave activity, and they would flash up a bunch of different pictures on the screen, right? And they wanted to see, all right, when you saw a giraffe, what parts of the brain light up? And when you saw an ice cream cone, what parts of the brain light up? And what they found is that the same parts of the brain light up when a man sees a woman in a bikini, and the same brainwaves fire off when a man sees a power tool. What does that mean? Besides men are dogs, yeah. What does that mean for us? It means that when a man is lusting after a woman in a bikini, he's not looking at her as anything other than a tool to be used. Before long, you don't know where you are or how you got there, and your life is in ruins. In church, I have to say, all of these things that I've brought to you today are difficult and bad. But the greatest damage of pornography is on our souls. Because porn is sin. Matthew 5:28 says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." See, we treat lust as a lesser sin. It's the idea of like, you can look, but you can't touch, right? You can go window shopping, you just can't buy anything type of mentality. But that's not true. Jesus says, no, it's not a lesser sin. It's sin. Just the lusting part of it. In 1 Corinthians 6, verse 18, it says, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexual immoral person sins against his own body." Now, Paul is specifically talking about prostitution here, or fornication with prostitutes. But the self-fornication that porn leads to is no less damaging. It ruins relationships. It cripples personalities. It uses people. It insults their spouse or their future spouse, and it also insults the entire institution of marriage. In Romans 6, verse 16, it says, "Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? Regardless of what your words say, you are a slave of the one whom you obey." As much as we might think, no, I belong to Jesus, I belong to Christ, is that apparent in your actions? Because Paul says you're a slave of the one whom you actually obey. What we talked about last week of, what is addiction? Addiction is knowing the thing that you're doing is wrong and you can't stop it. And so, who are we actually obeying here? In Galatians 5, verse 1, it says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." Christ has set us free not to be put under any yoke of slavery again. And that includes pornography addiction. In Hebrews 10, verse 26 and 27, it says, "For if we go on sinning deliberately, after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries." If you have knowledge that what you're doing is wrong, but you keep on sinning, God says there's no sacrifice left. The sacrifice has already been given. In 1 John 3, verses 6 and then verse 9, it says, "No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. No one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning, because he has been born of God." You simply cannot abide with God and live a lifestyle of sin. We can't be living a lifestyle of addiction to pornography and be accepting to God. And so it comes back to this, what we talked about at the very beginning. Much of our sin is simply an effort to gain by selfish means the satisfaction or security that God has promised to give us freely. In Jeremiah chapter 2, we see this very interesting discourse going on between God and his people. In Jeremiah 2, verse 2, God says, "I remember the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown." God says, I remember the old days, how devoted to me you were. In verse 5, he continues on and says, "What wrong did your fathers find in me, that they went far from me and went after worthlessness and became themselves worthless?" See, this is what happens in our lives. God is just describing here what happens for all of us, regardless of what sin it is. It just happens to, I'm using it here to talk about pornography. We're living our lives, and then something entices us, something flashy catches our eye, and we leave. God didn't leave. We leave, right? And God's saying, what did I do? What fault did your fathers find in me that they just left? Verse 13, it says, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fount of living waters, and had hewn out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." I mean, the image here that God is giving us is heartbreaking. And it's hard to wrap your head around, right? When we think about it, of God saying, I've given you freely, free access to this fount of living waters. And I don't know if you know anything about ancient cisterns, the water that they collected through the rainy season after it sits for a long time, it's not appetizing. It's the opposite. But it waters crops just fine. It's just full of diseases and bugs and animals and just nastiness, right? And we say, yeah, God, your fount of living waters, that's cool and all, but I want this. I want the disgusting water. It doesn't make sense, right? Like, it does not make sense at all. God says two evils. He says you choose sin, and that's bad enough. But he said to choose sin, to choose this over what I've provided you is just ludicrous. We have access to real closeness and intimacy with God, but we wanted something else. And we turned to something that has no hope of satisfying us. And you see how, again, this cycle of addiction is just throughout all of this. It's like the more we drink, the thirstier we become. We become gluttons, or self-indulgent on something that will never satisfy. This destroys a man's ability to serve God the way that he was intended. And I believe shame is robbing robbing the future of so many men in our congregations today. They're supposed to be leaders, but they can't because they hate themselves. So they think, why would anyone want to follow me? I wouldn't want anyone to follow me. And so they hide. And Satan uses shame to keep us down, and we become our own worst enemies. It damages our relationship to God. It damages our relationship to people. We are living at rock bottom. The world is broken beyond repair. In Psalm 51, verse 3, it says, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me." That's our world. Our sin is, it's just everywhere. We're living in filth. But you know the good thing about living at rock bottom? Now that we're good and depressed. The good thing about living at rock bottom is the only way to go is up. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. We got 5 minutes if there are questions or comments. I talked a little too fast today, but Scott?
To what he said, especially about the impact other than the personal, is, in pornography, a major component of this is selfishness. And we're, as a society, we're being more and more selfish. And one thing that this really impacts that a lot of people don't think about is our future as a nation. This is impacting the relationship between men and women and preventing people from being willing to form families and have children. We are not having enough children as a society. And fortunately for us, there are groups like the Japanese, the Spanish, others around the world that are way ahead of us on this. That they're seeing their population. There are no young people. They want more and more from their government, but nobody's going to be there to pay the taxes. There's a practical implication and consequence of our selfishness. And this is just another reason to focus on trying to deal with this. So, thanks.
Absolutely. Alicia had 4 kids, so we did double duty. We're good.
Yeah, Christine.
You were talking about human trafficking. I hate to bring everybody down a little further, but it comes through here every day. We're at the crossroads of 2 major highways. During Frontier Days, there's a lot of that comes through. There's a lot that the police department and fines that comes through here a lot.
I have a friend who works for the state police. And he introduced me to a friend that's his division is sex trafficking. And if you want to hear some nightmares that'll keep you up at night, go talk to some of those people. It's horrible. All right. We'll say a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for today and this time that we have to be together. God, as we talk about these difficult subjects, God, help us to use this, to cling more closely to you. You're the only one that's going to be able to save us, to rescue us from this rock bottom world. God, help us to cling tightly to you, to recognize the world for what it is, and to not become a friend of the world. God, for those who have been affected by sexual assault or pornography use, God, I pray that you be with them, that you show them that you are the answer, that you are the perfect Father, that you are love. For those who are struggling with addiction themselves, and I pray that you crush their pride, that they would reach out for help, that they would realize that you have already provided the avenue by which that they might seek help. God, help us to trust you. Help us to lean on you. Help us to do things the way that you want us to do them. God, please be with us now as we enter into a time of worship, that we might sing songs of praise and pray and remember your Son the way that you would want us to, and that this would be a pleasing aroma to you. We love you. It's in your